I was born mute. I was picked up by Shen Han at the mass grave. When he saw the half-jade pendant in my hand, his eyes reddened as he asked me, "Are you Xiao Wu?" The jade pendant was something I'd pried from a rotting corpse, intending to sell it for money, but I didn't shake my head, and just like that, I became the daughter of the general's manor, Shen Yunwu. For 10 years, he doted on me more than anything else in the world, until the real Shen Yunwu came home. Her body was covered in scars, and she clutched the other half of the jade pendant, sobbing bitterly. Shen Han looked at me with nothing but hatred in his eyes. "You made her suffer 10 years of undeserved agony. Now you'll spend the rest of your life paying for it. Starvation, kneeling on shards of broken porcelain, enduring endless humiliation." He watched coldly from the sidelines, only ordering someone to splash water on me to wake me up when I was on the verge of passing out. "This is nothing compared to what Xiao Wu went through. You have to endure 100 times her pain." Later, I found out I was carrying his child. I escaped through a dog hole, only to be drugged and sold to a brothel. As I struggled, I saw him across the street, gently pouring tea for Shen Yunwu. The moment our eyes met, I slammed my head against the white wall. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in the rotting mud of the mass grave, and Shen Han was staring at me intently. Are you Xiao Wu?" The blood-stained jade pendant shard was still clutched tightly in my hand. The sound of horse hooves drew near in the distance. I knew he was coming. This time, I would not make the same mistake again. The horse hooves stopped. A pair of warm hands lifted me up tremblingly. Shen Han stared at me, his eyes burning with unspeakable excitement, his voice shaking. Are you Xiao Wu?" I recognized that look. It was exactly the same as when he'd found his real sister in my past life. I hastily used the sign language he'd taught me in my previous life to sign. "No, I'm not," but he couldn't understand sign language at this time. He'd only asked the elderly palace nanny to teach me sign language in my past life so that his mute sister could communicate with others. How could he possibly understand the meaning of these gestures now? He just pulled me into his arms to comfort me. Don't be afraid, brother has found you now." I breathed in that unfamiliar yet familiar scent, and memories of how he'd pinned me down on the bed after getting drunk in my past life flooded my mind. I started trembling even more violently. He'd bitten me over and over again that night, growling at me, asking me why I'd lied to him, why I'd pretended to be his sister. "I don't want this. I don't want to know him ever again." I pushed him away with all my strength, knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly, shaking my head frantically as I threw the jade pendant into the mud. But he just cupped my face in his hands, wiped the tears from my eyes, and ordered coldly, "The young lady has been found. She's suffered severe shock. Send for the best physician in the city at once." Terrified that history would repeat itself, I took advantage of his momentary distraction to bite down hard on the back of his hand, then ran for my life. But I only managed to take a few steps before my vision started to spin. I'd forgotten that I was just a beggar who hadn't eaten or drunk anything for 3 whole days. My legs gave way beneath me, and I fainted. When I woke up, I was already in the general's manor. Silk quilts and embroidered curtains surrounded me, and the air was filled with the faint scent of sandalwood. It was the exact same room as in my past life. Even the potted orchid by the window was in the same spot. "The young lady is awake," a familiar voice sounded. It was Nanny Lee, the only person who'd been kind to me in my past life. I sat up abruptly, grabbing her arm to try to explain myself, but she couldn't understand my gestures. She just kept urging me to lie back down. In my past life, I'd lived a life of luxury in the general's manor for 10 years. Even though I couldn't speak, I'd learned to communicate through sign language and writing. But now, I was just a beggar who'd crawled out of the mass grave. All I could do was make terrified, inarticulate sounds. Nanny Lee brought me a bowl of kanji. "Don't be afraid, young lady. The general has ordered that you are his long-lost younger sister, Shen Yunwu. You've been through so much hardship. The physician says you lost your ability to speak due to extreme shock. From now on, this is your home. You can finally rest easy. I shook my head frantically, pointing to the door, then to myself, waving my hands in a desperate attempt to say no. You want to go outside, young lady? Nanny Lee looked troubled. The general has ordered that you are not to take a single step out of the general's manor until you recover your memories. Recover my memories? I had no memories to recover in the first place. In the days that followed, Shen Hansan came to see me every single day. He took off his armor and wore plain blue robes instead, looking every bit the gentle and refined scholar. But I knew what kind of ruthless monster lurked beneath that handsome exterior. Xiao Wu, this is your favorite sweet osmanthus cake, he said, pushing the plate of pastries in front of me. Do you remember, you used to pester brother to buy them for you all the time? I kept my head down, too afraid to look him in the eye. My hands trembled as I signed on the table. I'm not Xiao Wu. He still couldn't understand. He just pushed the plate closer to me, his voice soft. Eat, you're far too thin. I reached out and knocked the plate off the table in a fit of rage. The sweet osmanthus cakes scattered all over the floor. Nanny Lee dropped to her knees in terror. Forgive us, General. The young lady, she's just... Shen Hansen waved his hand dismissively. It's all right. Brother will buy you more. He knelt down and picked up the broken pieces of porcelain one by one. As I stared at his focused profile, memories of my past life flooded my mind, the days when I was imprisoned. And he'd thrown shards of broken porcelain on the ground for me to kneel on, sneering. Tell me, how should I punish you? I shuddered violently. I would rather beg for food on the streets than endure that kind of suffering ever again. Summoning up all my courage, I grabbed his hand and dragged him to the study. It was here, in my past life, that he'd taught me how to write stroke by stroke. I still remembered every word. I picked up a brush, ready to write, but he snatched it away from me. Xiao Wu, calligraphy is not a toy, he said gently. When you're older, brother will teach you properly. He lifted me up in his arms, ignoring my fists pounding against his chest, and carried me back to my room. I didn't understand. This time, I had tried to resist. I had made it clear that I wasn't his sister, so why was he turning a blind eye to everything? In the days that followed, I resorted to throwing tantrums and acting like a spoiled brat, hoping that he would get tired of me and throw me out. When he sent me beautiful clothes and jewelry, I cut them to pieces and threw them out the window. The maidservants cleaned up the mess, trembling with fear, but he just waved his hand and ordered new ones to be sent in. When he brought me delicacies from all over the land every day, I went on a hunger strike. In response, he removed all the food, leaving only a bowl of clear water for me. When I was so hungry that I was dizzy and snuck a drink of water in the middle of the night, I discovered that he'd already mixed honey into it. He invited physicians to diagnose my pulse and prescribed countless tonics for me. I clamped my lips shut tightly, spitting out every drop of medicine they tried to feed me, soaking my clothes and the bed sheets in the dark liquid. He personally brought the bowl of medicine to my room. Pressing the spoon against my lips, "Be good," I glared at him, took a sip of the bitter medicine, then spat it all over his face. The medicine dripped all over his robes. He clenched his fists tightly. I shrank back, closing my eyes, waiting for his anger to explode, but nothing happened for a long time. When I opened my eyes again, he'd dismissed all the servants. He pressed the spoon against my lips once more, his voice low and dangerous. "Drink it, or I won't mind feeding you mouth to mouth." Something was wrong. Everything was going wrong. Shen Hansan was even gentler and more attentive than he'd been in my past life. The kinder he was to me, the more terrified I became. I didn't dare to imagine how terrible my fate would be when the real Shen Yunwu came home. Under the cover of night, I packed some gold, silver, and jewelry, and ran instinctively toward the secluded west side gate, the same way I'd tried to escape in my past life. As I passed through a bamboo grove in the dark, I crashed into a firm, hard chest. It was Shen Han's hand. He grabbed my wrist in a vice-like grip. My bundle fell to the ground, spilling silver coins and jewelry everywhere. He didn't look at the scattered treasures. He only looked at me. How did you know to come this way? He squeezed my arm so hard that it hurt. I started shaking my head frantically, pointing in random directions, making urgent, inarticulate sounds in my throat. Tears welled up in my eyes, partly an act, partly genuine fear of him. He stood motionless, letting me put on my little show. I continued to look confused and terrified, shaking my head violently, pointing back the way I'd come, then gesturing wildly in other directions, all the while making panicked noises. He slowly loosened his grip on my wrist. I was being foolish, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. How could a beggar who just crawled out of the mass grave know the most hidden path in the manor? He wrapped his arm around my shoulders, half forcing me to walk back to my room. Let's go back. The night air is cold. I couldn't run away. So I resigned myself to my fate and began to act like the young lady of the Shen Manor. After all, the real Shen Yunwu wouldn't come home for another 10 years. I started eating again, no longer going on hunger strikes. I learned embroidery, calligraphy, music, and chess, all of it taught personally by Shen Han's Han. He was even more patient than he'd been in my past life, always speaking to me in a soft, gentle voice, as if he was afraid of scaring me. I didn't resist anymore. I just learned. After my lessons, I would curl up by the window, staring blankly at the sky outside. Gradually, the servants in the manor got used to their quiet, taciturn young lady. Only Nanny Lee would sigh sometimes, saying that there was always an empty, distant look in the young lady's eyes. One day, while practicing calligraphy, I dipped my brush in thick ink and wrote on the paper, "I am not Shen Yunwu." Shen Hansen stood behind me, watching silently for a long time. Then he said softly, "Xiao Wu, you've just suffered too much shock. You've forgotten who you are." I'd known he would say that. I dipped my brush in ink again and wrote, "I want to go to Jiangnan. I want to travel." My brush paused for a moment. I thought of how the real Shen Yunwu had cried when she'd come home in my past life, telling everyone about her suffering in Jiangnan. Every word had pierced Shen Hanshan's heart, making him want to skin me alive and tear me limb from limb. What if, this time, I found the real Shen Yunwu first? Would he still hate me so much then? Shen Hanshan didn't say anything for a long time, so long that I wrote the same sentence again. "I want to go to Jiangnan." Finally, he spoke. Just one word. Good. Everything went surprisingly smoothly. Before long, I found the real Shen Yunwu. She was washing dishes in the kitchen of Huachun Building, a local restaurant. Her hands were red and swollen from the hot water, but her face was clean. She looked far better than I'd imagined. In my past life, she'd come home covered in scars. This time, she was just thin. When I pulled out the half-jade pendant from my pocket, she froze. Then she took out the other half from her bosom, carefully wrapped in a tattered piece of cloth. As the two halves clicked together perfectly, I let out a sigh of relief. This time, she hadn't suffered too much. I took her to meet Shen Hanshan, giving Shen Yunwu a gentle push forward. She looked up at him timidly. I had expected him to be overcome with emotion, just like in my past life, his eyes reddening as he pulled her into his arms, his voice cracking with sobs, but he didn't. He only glanced down at the perfectly matched pair of jade pendants, then at Shen Yunwu, before his gaze finally settled on me. Then he reached out, taking my hand in one of his and Shen Yunwu's in the other. "Let's go home." On the carriage ride back, Shen Yunwu clutched her half of the jade pendant tightly. She stole occasional glances at Shen Hanshan, then quickly looked away, blushing. Shen Hanshan kept his eyes closed the entire time, his fingers tapping gently on his knees, a habit he had when he was deep in thought. When we returned to the general's manor, Nanny Lee came out to greet us. She froze for a moment when she saw two young ladies standing side by side. "Miss Shen," she stammered, looking from Shen Yunwu to me, clearly at a loss. They are both my sisters, Shen Hansan said. Prepare the east chamber for Yunwu. As for her, he nodded at me, she will stay in her original courtyard. Nanny Li bowed her head in acknowledgement and led Shen Yunwu away. Shen Hansan stood with his back to me. You knew where she was all along, didn't you? He asked suddenly. My breath hitched in my throat. The men I sent to look for her found nothing after 3 months of searching, he said, turning to face me, his eyes piercing. How did you find her so easily the moment you set foot in Jiangnan? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. All I could do was shake my head frantically. He took a step closer, leaning down to look me in the eye. What else do you know? I stepped back in fear. Xiao Wu, he called me, his voice soft yet loaded with meaning. Have you also been reborn? I kept my head down, biting my lips so hard that I tasted blood. Then I looked up at him with a blank, confused expression, signing frantically. I don't understand what you're saying. I had guessed correctly, he had been reborn too. Shen Yunwu hated sweet Osmanthus cakes. It had always been me who loved them. If he had really been reborn, if he remembered everything from our past life, my deception, my tragic death, all the suffering Shen Yunwu had endured, then why had he picked me up from the mass grave again in this life? Why didn't he hate me with every fiber of his being, killing me immediately to eliminate any future trouble? Why hadn't he been in a hurry to find the real Shen Yunwu? Even more puzzling, why had he been so calm and silent just now? When his long-lost little sister was standing right in front of him, I had pretended not to understand, hoping that he would let me go, let me live out my days in peace. Now that I already knew how this story would end, after that day, the general's manor had 2 young ladies. Shen Yunwu lived in the east chamber, and I stayed in the west courtyard. Nanny Li assigned double the number of servants to take care of us, but it was obvious that she favored the east chamber. Her eyes filled with undisguised compassion whenever she looked at Shen Yunwu. Shen Hansan was kind to Shen Yunwu. He taught her how to read and write, and told her stories about the border wars he had fought in. His kindness toward her was exactly the same as the tenderness he had shown me during the first 10 years of my past life, thoughtful, meticulous, and flawless. But his eyes when he looked at her were far too calm. Instead, he came to the west courtyard far more often. Sometimes he would come in the evening, sitting alone on the stone bench in my courtyard, playing a game of chess against himself. Sometimes he would come in the dead of night. I would push open my window and see his tall, dark figure standing in the corridor. He never spoke, and I never signed to him. We just stood there in silence, staring at each other across the darkness. Shen Yunwu also started coming to the west courtyard more frequently. There was a strange naivety about her. She was fearless, outgoing, and loved to talk. One day, she was fidgeting with the half-jade pendant hanging from my waist, the same pendant that Shen Hansan had restrung with a new cord, insisting that I wear it at all times. Sister Anning, she said, suddenly looking up at me with a bright, smiling face. Where did you find this jade pendant? Anning, it was the new name Shen Hansan had given me. He had said that I couldn't keep calling myself Xiao Wu forever. I signed slowly, my fingers moving with deliberate care. At the mass grave, I found it in the hand of a charred corpse. I was so hungry that I just wanted to pawn it for a steamed bun. She let out a soft "oh," her fingers tracing the edge of the jade pendant gently. Do you know who he was? She asked, her voice casual. I shook my head. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He was a worker at Huichun building, just like me. My hands froze mid-sign. He tried to steal my jade pendant, she said, tilting her head to the side, her tone light and carefree. So I had to burn him to death. But the fire got out of control too quickly. I didn't have time to grab the other half of the pendant from his hand. She held up her own half of the jade pendant, turning it over in her hand to catch the light. Sister Anning, she said, turning back to look at me with that same innocent smile. You don't think I'm cruel, do you? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up straight. I shook my head again, my body stiff with terror. She laughed, a sweet, melodious sound that sent chills down my spine. I just don't like it when people try to take what's mine. She jumped down from the stool and skipped out of the courtyard, humming a tune as she went. A few days later, news arrived from the palace. The Empress was celebrating her birthday and would be hosting a grand banquet for all the imperial officials and their families. When the guest list arrived at the general's manor, Shun Hanshan was in the west courtyard. He handed the invitation to me, pointing to the line that read, General Shun and his sister. I understood what Shen Yunwu wanted and quickly made an excuse, claiming to be unwell and needing to rest in bed. Shen Yunwu, dressed in a magnificent silk gown, linked arms with Shun Hanshan and boarded the carriage to the palace. The manor fell silent. Nanny Li brought me a bowl of medicinal soup, sighing softly as she set it down on the table. You should go out more often, young lady. Staying cooped up in this courtyard all day long. Her words trailed off as sudden, hurried footsteps echoed from outside. A guard I had never seen before stumbled into the courtyard, his body covered in blood. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The general has been assassinated. He's critically wounded. He specifically asked for Miss Anning to come to him at once. Nanny Li panicked, grabbing my hands tightly in hers. Young lady, what are we going to do? My mind went blank with shock and fear. You have to go see him, young lady. The guard crawled forward, clutching the hem of my dress, leaving bloodstains on the fabric. The general is dying. He says he must see you. He's at the dilapidated temple west of the city. I signed urgently, lead the way. The guard led me through the streets, which grew increasingly desolate and dark the farther we went. The sense of unease in my heart tightened like a taut string. Something was very wrong. How much farther? I stopped abruptly, signing the question urgently. The guard turned around. The look of panic and fear was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, empty numbness. We're here, he said flatly. Several burly figures emerged from the shadows, surrounding me in an instant. I turned to run, but a sharp pain exploded at the base of my skull. My vision went black, and I crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was the fake guard's cold voice. The eldest young lady ordered that she be sold far away, somewhere as terrible as possible. When I woke up again, I was lying in a jolting carriage. My mouth was stuffed with a tattered cloth, and my hands and feet were bound tightly with thick rope. I struggled violently, and the carriage curtain was pulled back. An oily, leering face peered in at me, grinning maliciously. Awake already? Save your strength, girl. You've got a long night ahead of you once we reach the 100 Flowers brothel. 100 Flowers brothel, the same place I had been sold to in my past life. Fate was truly cruel. No matter how hard I ran, no matter how far I hid, I always ended up back at the same terrible destination. The carriage came to a stop, and I was roughly dragged out of it. In front of me stood a brightly lit building, with large red lanterns hanging high above the entrance. The sounds of men's laughter and women's giggles drifted out from inside, lewd and vulgar. The brothel madam waddled out, pinching my chin roughly to examine my face. Well, fancy clothes you're wearing. You wouldn't happen to be some rich man's daughter, would you? She's not. Have you ever seen a rich man's daughter who's a mute? Hurry up and name your price. Only then did the madam notice that I hadn't said a single word, only tears were streaming down my face. Oh, she's a mute. That's a rare find. She'll fetch a pretty penny for sure, 80 taels of silver. I endured the same torment as I had in my past life. If I refused to take clients, I was beaten. But the madam was afraid of damaging my looks and lowering my value. So she only used needles to pierce the tips of my fingers instead. I opened my mouth to scream and cry, but no sound escaped my lips. 10 days later, I was reduced to a mere breath of life, lying on the floor of a dirty room, barely conscious. The door creaked open, but instead of the brothel thugs, it was a young girl who walked in, Sister Anning, it was Shen Yunwu. It really is you, she said, tilting her head to the side, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. What are you doing here? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. She laughed, a sweet, musical sound that made my blood run cold. I told you before, she said, her voice still dripping with honey. I don't like it when people take what's mine. You a mute, a dirty beggar, how dare you share the same roof as me? How dare you call yourself the young lady of the Shen Manor? She stood up, lifting her foot and stomping down hard on my hand. Pain seared through my body, making me convulse violently. My fingers scrabbled at her ankle desperately, leaving several bloody scratches on her skin. She frowned in annoyance, pressing her foot down even harder. Who do you think you are, scratching me like this? She sneered. I bit my lip so hard that it started bleeding, the blood trickling down my chin. When she had vented her anger, she turned to leave, pushing the door open. But she froze in the doorway, her face draining of color. It really is you, brother, it's not what it looks like. Please listen to me explain. I never thought I would see the day when Shen Hanshan would raise his hand to hit his long-lost little sister, the sister he had dreamed of day and night for 10 long years. Shen Hanshan was a seasoned warrior, undefeated in battle. The slap he delivered was powerful enough to make Shen Yunwu's entire face swell up instantly. She clutched her cheek, staring at him in shock and disbelief, her eyes wide with tears. Brother, another slap, and another. He didn't stop. Not until Shen Yunwu collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Only then did Shen Hanshan lower his hand. He stood there, staring down at his palm in a daze. Then his shoulders began to shake violently. He was crying. Tears fell from his eyes, splattering onto the ground, mixing with the blood on Shen Yunwu's face. He stepped over her unconscious body, walking slowly toward me. He knelt down and lifted me into his arms with the utmost care, as if I were a precious, fragile treasure. Anning, he whispered, burying his face in the crook of my neck, his voice choked with sobs. I'm so sorry, Anning, I was so scared that I would never find you again. I was taken back to the West Courtyard once more. In my feverish sleep, I drifted back into the past. I was kneeling in the ancestral hall of the general's manor, the perfectly matched pair of jade pendants laid out in front of me on a wooden table. Shen Yunwu nestled against Shen Hanshan's side, clutching his sleeve and weeping pitifully. Brother, she looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the old scars on her arm. It was her. She stole my jade pendant, she stole my name, she stole my home. That's why I had to suffer so much out there, all alone. Use the torture devices, Shen Hanshan ordered coldly, his voice filled with rage. The bamboo finger cuffs clamped down tightly on my fingers, the pain excruciating. Shen Hanshan stood above me, looking down at me with pure hatred in his eyes. If it weren't for you, if you hadn't pretended to be Xiao Wu, she would never have ended up in the brothel. She would never have suffered such humiliation. You damned mute. I wanted to say that it wasn't true. I wanted to explain that the corpse had been rotting away, that I had thought she was dead. I just wanted a place to belong. I just wanted someone to look at me the way he was looking at Shen Yunwu now, but I couldn't say a word. I was a mute. A sharp pain erupted in my abdomen. I watched in horror as blood spread across my lower body, staining my dress red. No, my baby, please, give me back my baby. I jolted awake with a scream that died in my throat. It had been just a nightmare. Shen Hanshan was lying on the edge of my bed, fast asleep. The bandages around my 10 fingers were already soaked with fresh blood. The moment I moved, Shen Hanshan jolted awake. He threw himself at me, pulling me into his arms tightly. Anning, don't be afraid, I'm here, I've always been here. I turned my face away, refusing to look at him. I hated him. I had almost forgotten the pain of my past life. But the nightmare had felt so real, how could I not hate him? Shen Hanshan thought I was still angry. He hurried to explain himself, his voice urgent. Anning, I promise you, I've taught Xiao Wu a lesson she'll never forget. I'll lock her up in confinement. 3 months. No, half a year, a whole year. I won't let her out until you've forgiven her. I held out my hand, using my blood-stained fingertips to write 3 words softly in his palm. I hate you. Shen Han's hand froze for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. You have every right to. Anning, as long as you don't leave me, you can hate me as much as you want. In my past life, he had held my fingers like this too, correcting my calligraphy stroke by stroke, his voice gentle as he praised me. Xiao Wu, you have such beautiful hands. And your handwriting is exquisite. During my recovery, Shen Han's hand took care of me personally, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Then one day, Shen Yunwu knelt at my feet, her hands raised, palms facing upward. Anning Jie, please forgive me. I was abducted when I was little, and I suffered so much. I was just so scared that someone would take everything away from me. I was afraid that you would steal my Gij away from me. That's why I did those terrible things to you. Gij has already punished me enough. Look, I finally noticed the scars covering her palms, fresh, raw wounds, the skin torn and swollen at the edges. They were exactly the same as the injuries I had sustained from the bamboo finger cuffs in my past life. Shen Hansan had actually made Shen Yunwu suffer the exact same torture that I had endured in my past life. He had subjected me to unspeakable torment to avenge his sister. In this life, he had inflicted the same pain on his own sister to avenge me. The method was the same, only the victim had changed, but that cold, ruthless cruelty in him remained unchanged. He was still the same Shen Hansan. Shen Hansan, you truly are a madman. You were in my past life. And perhaps even more so in this one. I slowly raised my hand, pointing first at Shen Yunwu, then at Shen Hansan, then I held both hands out, palms up, before slowly clapping them together and pulling them apart again. You too are exactly the same. Shen Hansan understood the gesture. His face turned pale instantly. Shen Yunwu was still crying, her voice trembling. Anning Jie, please forgive me. That's enough. Shen Hansan cut her off, his voice cold and hard. Get out. Shen Yunwu froze, looking up at him in confusion. Gij, get out. Shen Yunwu bit her lip, then scrambled to her feet and stumbled out of the room, wiping her tears as she went. Once again, we were alone. Shen Hansan walked over to me, kneeling down in front of my bed. He reached out as if to touch my hand, then hesitated, pulling back at the last second. I've made a mistake again, haven't I? I didn't respond. I just didn't know what else to do, he said, hanging his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. When I saw her hurting you, I wanted to kill her more than anything. But she's my sister. I gestured that I wanted to write something. He quickly brought me a brush and paper. General Shen, I wrote slowly, stroke by stroke. You rescued me from the mass grave. I helped you find your sister. We are even now. Please let me go. I want to leave this place. Before I could finish writing, Shen Hansan snatched the paper from my hand and tore it to shreds, his eyes blazing with rage. Leave? Why would you want to leave? What right do you have? I've provided you with food and clothing, made you the young lady of the Shen Manor, and this is how you repay me, by leaving. You're a mute. Without me, how do you think you'll survive? The look of fury on his face was exactly the same as it had been in my past life. I withdrew my hand indifferently, refusing to say another word to him. He grew more and more frustrated, shouting insults at me, threatening me, begging me to stay. But when he saw that I remained unmoved, he finally snapped, his voice cold and cruel. You're not going anywhere without my permission. The door slammed shut behind him. A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candle flame. The room was plunged into complete darkness. Just like in my past life, when I had been locked in the dark firewood room, the sound of rats scurrying around echoing in my ears, I had cried. Clutching the jade hairpin in my hair, the gift he had given me for my coming-of-age ceremony, in my past life, I had been too afraid of the pain to go through with it, and had finally let go of the hairpin. I touched the jade hairpin in my hair, now far more exquisite and valuable than the one from my past life. General, Miss Anning, she's. By the time Shen Hansan rushed back to the room, Nanny Lee was pressing her hand tightly against the wound on my neck. But blood was still gushing out from between her fingers, soaking her sleeve. Move aside. Shen Hansan roughly pushed her away, kneeling down in front of me and pouring a whole jar of golden healing ointment over my neck. As a general who had fought countless battles, the imperial court had rewarded him with the finest healing medicine, an ointment that could stop bleeding in an instant. I didn't die. Once again, he lifted me into his arms. Anning, let me tell you a story, he said. His voice hoarse and trembling. A long time ago, there was a man who fell in love with his own sister, the sister he had lived with day and night for years. But she was his blood sister. He thought of himself as a monster, a beast unworthy of love. Then one day, his real sister returned home, covered in scars, crying her heart out. His first reaction wasn't anger, it was joy, unbridled, insane joy. My hand trembled violently. He glanced down at me, then continued his story, his voice softening. He was happy because he thought, finally, he could love her openly. But he couldn't, there were too many eyes watching. He had been fooled by a little girl, and now he was trapped in a cage of his own making. So he did the stupidest thing of his life. He lifted his head, looking at me, his eyes red-rimmed with unshed tears. He took all his hatred, all his fear, all his confusion and helplessness, and he poured it all out on that fake sister. He tortured her, humiliated her, hurt her in the cruelest ways possible. He wanted to prove to himself that he didn't care about her, that he could hate her as much as he wanted. His voice cracked, and he fell silent for a long time before finally continuing, his voice barely a whisper. But he couldn't fool himself. Every time he ordered her to be punished, he would turn away and vomit. Every time he saw her bleed, he took my hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. It felt like someone was stabbing a knife into me again and again. He loved her so much it drove him mad, so he took advantage of his drunkenness to do the one thing he had always wanted, to have her, to make her his. Beneath my palm, his heart was beating fast and hard, like it might burst out of his chest at any moment. Then that fake sister died. She died right in front of him. It wasn't until her death that he found out she was pregnant. He had killed the woman he loved, and their unborn child, with his own 2 hands. His punishment came soon after. His long-lost real sister was as venomous as a snake. No matter how much he indulged her, she eventually poisoned him to death anyway, all to seize the family fortune for herself. He hugged me even tighter, resting his chin gently on top of my head. I only ask one thing of you. Don't die. If you want to hate me, then live to hate me. If you want to take revenge, then live to take revenge. Do whatever you want to me, just don't leave me like this again. His body was shaking violently. This was a general who had killed countless men on the battlefield, who had stared death in the face 100 times, and yet now, as he held me in his arms, he couldn't stop trembling. I slowly raised my hand, signing the same words I had signed before. I don't understand. My eyes were filled with confusion, as if I really was just a poor, mute girl who had been toyed with by fate, who knew nothing of his past, nothing of his pain.
He poured me a small cup of wine, then tilted his head back and drained his own cup in one gulp. Anning, he said, staring at the reflection of the moon rippling in his cup, believe it or not, being able to meet you again in this life is the greatest fortune I have ever known, and also the greatest punishment. He smiled a sad, bitter smile. But I accept it, I accept all of it. He raised his cup in a toast to me. Farewell then, take care. I didn't touch my cup. Instead, I used my finger to slowly trace 4 words on the stone table in front of him. Don't ever look for me, okay? His voice drifted away on the night breeze, soft and broken. I won't. At dawn the next day, the carriage was waiting outside the manor gate. Shenhan's hand did not come to see me off. Nanny Li, her eyes red-rimmed with tears, pressed a hand warmer into my hands. "Take care on the road, young lady, it's cold out there." The carriage rolled forward slowly, passing through the city gates. The hustle and bustle of the streets faded away behind us, replaced by the howl of the wind. I didn't know what the future held, but at the very least, I was free, free from the general's manor, free from Shenhan's hand, free from the bloody nightmare of my past life, finally free. As for the empty, aching hole in my heart, perhaps with time, it would heal and grow new flesh, perhaps it never would. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that I could finally, at long last, just be Anning, a mute, an ordinary person, someone who could live a life for herself. Hash hash hash, Shenhanshan's perspective. The moment the poisoned wine coursed through my veins, I saw her again, the little girl lying in the mud. She looked just as I remembered her, small, timid, her eyes shining bright like stars. But unlike in my past life, she was quick to shake her head, making it clear that she was not my long-lost sister. I pretended not to understand her sign language, pretended that she was merely confused, her mind addled by the trauma she had endured. "Xiao Wu," I said, my voice soft with feigned joy. "Brother is taking you home." She shook her head frantically, signing the words "I'm not her" over and over again. I lifted her into my arms, ignoring her struggles. I could feel her body stiffen instantly, trembling violently against mine. In that moment, my heart ached so badly I could barely breathe. But more than that, I felt a surge of overwhelming relief. She was back, back where I could reach her, back where I could protect her, in this life. I swore to myself that I would treat her right, that I would make up for every bit of pain I had caused her in the last life, 100 times over, 1,000 times over. But she was always afraid of me. No matter how gently I smiled at her, no matter how softly I spoke to her, there was always a deep, unshakable fear in her eyes when she looked at me. She was always trying to run away. The first time I caught her sneaking out through the west side gate, a terrible suspicion crept into my mind, a suspicion I quickly buried deep down. No, it couldn't be true. It was too cruel to even imagine. I told myself it was just a coincidence. But then she wrote those words on the paper, "I want to go to Jiangnan," and then she found the real Xiao Wu with such ease, such precision. I had no choice but to face the truth. She had been reborn too. She carried with her all the memories of our past life, all the hatred. I panicked. I didn't know how to face her. Not when she hated me so deeply, so completely. All I could do was try to make amends, more carefully, more humbly than ever before. But she refused to give me even a single chance to atone for my sins. When she disappeared, I felt like my world was falling apart. I could barely stand. When I found her huddled on the floor, her hands covered in blood, I wanted nothing more than to kill that so-called sister of mine. But I couldn't. My parents' dying wish had been to find their lost daughter. I couldn't be so unfilial as to kill her. In the end, she still chose to leave, even threatening to take her own life to escape me. I had no right to keep her trapped here any longer. She chose the northern border. I wondered if it was because of the stories I had told her as a child, stories of the battles fought on the frontier. I sent Shen Yunwu to guard my parents' mausoleum, sentencing her to spend the rest of her life there, never to step foot outside again. Anning, that was the name I gave her. Anning, meaning peace and tranquility. I hoped with all my heart that she could finally find the peace she deserved. The emperor said that the fighting on the border was growing desperate. Ignoring my injuries, I threw myself back into the thick of battle. I wanted to win the war. I wanted her to hear the news of my victory. The moment the spear pierced my chest, I looked up at the sky. The moon was full and round, just like the night many years ago, when she had first come to the manor, and I had taught her to identify the stars. She had smiled at me then, her eyes crinkling at the corners, filled with the light of 1,000 stars. "Anning, this time, I truly won't look for you. You must be happy, live a long, happy life in a place where I can never find you again."